There are places on the map that seem engineered to test the limits of what we consider real. Areas where compasses drift with no cause, where witnesses recount the same event with unnerving contradictions, and where footprints vanish halfway across open snow. Time behaves oddly in these regions, stretching or compressing as if influenced by something beneath the surface. These stories are not inventions from internet forums or campfire dramatizations. They come from formal reports, halted investigations, and families who still wait for answers that never arrive. Events that begin like accidents, but evolve into puzzles carved into the land, resistant to logic and closure. The most unsettling of these areas lies in the far north of the United States, in a vast territory so indifferent to human presence that it seems to absorb everything that crosses its threshold. This is the Alaska Triangle, defined by Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik. Since the late 1980s, more than 16,000 people have vanished within its boundaries. Some estimates push the total above 20,000 since the 1970s, a disappearance rate nearly twice the national average. And the missing were not careless travelers. They were seasoned pilots, trained professionals, fishermen who knew the sea, and lifelong residents, all taken by a silence that returns nothing. Authorities rely on familiar explanations: sudden storms, dangerous animals, or disorientation in a wilderness that erases any sense of direction. But locals, who understand the land in a way no map can capture, describe something stranger. They speak of vertical lights sliding down mountain slopes, of heavy footsteps pacing behind hunters when the path looks empty, and of voices calling people by name from deep inside the trees. These voices sound flawless, identical to loved ones who are nowhere near the region, a lure crafted to disarm. Then there are the scenes left behind, campsites arranged with unnatural order, meals untouched, gear lined with meticulous symmetry, snow trails showing two sets of prints until one stops abruptly, as if its owner dissolved into the air. Locked vehicles with nothing disturbed, radios emitting metallic bursts moments before falling silent forever. No struggle, no escape, only disappearance, deliberate and absolute. The disappearance that defined the region's reputation occurred in 1950, when a military aircraft carrying 44 people vanished, without leaving any trace. Not a fragment, not a stain of fuel. It was an erasure executed with impossible precision. Decades later, the pattern reappeared with regional flights and, most notably, with a small aircraft carrying two political figures. After a search lasting more than a month and involving hundreds of aircraft, no wreckage was found. The Alaska Triangle does not simply take people. It dismantles certainty, replacing it with something that feels intentionally hidden. The deeper investigators move into the history of the Alaska Triangle, the clearer it becomes that this region does not behave like a cluster of isolated disappearances. It behaves like a mechanism that reacts and shifts in ways no one fully understands. It cannot be reduced to neat timelines or simple theories. The place seems to wake under certain conditions, revealing its rules only when it is already too late. One of the most troubling patterns appears in years of search and rescue records. Before many disappearances, teams reported the same low vibration, a deep sound described as slow, steady breathing. It did not come from wind, animals, or engines. It rose from the ground itself, captured only by microphones able to catch faint pressure changes. Some rescuers said it felt like standing on top of a machine buried far, below the surface, waiting for a signal. Then there are the silent pockets. These are sections of forest where sound does not fade, it vanishes. People who enter them say even their footsteps seem to be swallowed. No birds, no insects, no wind in the branches. Navigation by satellite fails without warning. Radios cut out. Those who step into these zones report sudden dizziness, confusion, and a sharp feeling of being watched by something just outside. Their field of vision, almost every mapped silent. Pocket overlaps with the last known location of someone who never returned. The land itself adds to the unease. Geological surveys reveal scattered areas where the magnetic field twists in ways that make no sense. In some places, compasses swing toward the south. In others, the needle turns slowly, as if pulled by something moving deep underground. The shift can be strong enough to send even skilled travelers off course. Locals say the ground feels restless in these areas, as though something is turning or breathing below the roots. Older stories echo the same themes. Some residents speak of the Kushtaka, a figure that can imitate the voices of loved ones to lure people away from safety. The legend mirrors reports from those who vanished after hearing a familiar voice calling from the darkness. Others describe a pale, tall presence they call the White Shadow, something that stands in stillness at the edge of the trees and then disappears between one blink and the next. They do not call it an animal, they call it a watcher. And then there are the lights. Pilots, fishermen, and people in remote cabins describe thin vertical beams rising from the ground or dropping from the clouds with unnatural precision. They do not drift or flicker. They appear like narrow blades of light, sometimes motionless, sometimes moving in straight, impossible lines. The same descriptions repeat across years and distances. For many who live there, these lights are more than strange phenomena. They are a warning that the triangle is active, and that once it wakes, the safest choice is to stay where you are and not follow any voice that calls your name. As the pattern sharpens, the Alaska Triangle begins to feel less like a region on a map and more like a mechanism, something that activates under specific mysterious conditions. Time, temperature, magnetism, pressure in the air. No one knows what the trigger is. Veteran rescuers swear they can feel when the triangle is active. They describe a heavy stillness settling over the forest, a weight in the air, a sense that the landscape has shifted from neutral to watchful. One of the most disturbing cases happened near Talkeetna. A team of expert climbers vanished on what should have been a simple trek. Their camp was found in pristine condition, tents pitched perfectly, food separated and covered, gear arranged in careful rows. It looked more like a staged display than an abandoned campsite. No footprints leading away, no drag marks in the snow, no sign of storm or avalanche. It was as if everyone there had stood up at the same moment and stepped out of the world. Another case involves a lone survivor found 5 kilometers from where he disappeared, dehydrated and half frozen. He insisted he had been gone only minutes, yet nearly 19 hours had passed. His watch was stopped at a time that did not match the moment he was found. He claimed he had followed his wife's voice calling from the forest. Even though she had been at home more than 60 miles away, the voice sounded warm and familiar, but wrong in a way he could not describe. Along the coast, fishermen describe nights when a cold blue glow rises on the horizon. It is not the shifting light of the aurora. This glow stands still, a single pillar piercing the sky. When it appears, the wind dies and the water turns unnaturally calm. Like dark glass, shadows glide beneath the surface. Long shapes too large to be fish and too coordinated to be whales. Many refuse to stay on the water when that light appears. They say it feels like being watched from below. Authorities keep repeating the same explanations: weather, wildlife, poor planning. But people who live there know when a story has been stretched too far. One anonymous pilot claimed his aircraft's instruments shut down mid-flight, sending the plane into a silent descent. When the systems came back, he was more than 40 kilometers off course, with minutes missing from his memory. No known malfunction could explain it. Every year, new teams enter the triangle with better technology: drones, thermal cameras, advanced navigation, military sensors. Every year, they return with data that leads nowhere. It is as if the region decides what can be seen and what must stay hidden, offering fragments that disturb but never resolve. Whatever governs the Alaska Triangle does not take people at random. It seems to wait for ordinary moments when everything feels safe, and then quietly remove someone from the story. As investigators pushed deeper into the triangle, they discovered a detail that cut across the official narrative. Many victims disappeared while conditions were unusually calm. Clear skies, stable pressure, sharp visibility. Not the kind of weather that causes accidents, but the kind that encourages people to relax, to trust the day, to push a little farther than they planned. Audio logs captured during search missions reveal a recurring phenomenon, a low, thrumming vibration that seems to roll through the ground like a distant engine. It is not seismic. It is not mechanical. The sound behaves like something alive, rising and falling with a slow rhythm. In more than one case, that vibration appeared on recordings, minutes before contact was lost with someone on the ground. Another pattern appears in so-called dead air pockets. These are stretches of wilderness where sound ceases to exist, not softened, erased. In these pockets, rescuers report sudden dizziness, waves of nausea, and the sensation of being watched from somewhere just beyond the trees. Radios cut out, voices fade. Every documented dead air pocket has been connected to at least one missing person case, as if these zones mark entry points to somewhere else. Instruments brought into the region detect disturbances that should not be there. Magnetometers register wild jumps, as though reacting to a massive object moving beneath the surface. In some areas, radio waves collapse into static. In others, batteries drain in seconds, leaving teams without light or communication. Several pilots say the triangle feels physically dense, as if the air itself has thickened. They describe flying through an invisible pressure that grips the aircraft. Among locals, theories divide into what has always been known and what few want to admit. Old stories tell of tall, pale figures roaming the snow, mimicking familiar voices to lure travelers off safe paths. Newer whispers mention Cold War tunnels in the mountains, abandoned experiments and structures that might still be active under the ice, humming while the landscape pretends to sleep. The most controversial idea circulates among military pilots and technicians. According to this theory, the Alaska Triangle sits on a convergence point where magnetic, atmospheric, and gravitational forces overlap in unstable ways. When those forces align, space and time may not behave as expected. Pilots have reported abrupt altitude jumps, impossible distances covered in moments, and instruments briefly showing coordinates that do not exist on any chart. Any single anomaly might be dismissed as error or superstition. Together, they form a pattern that suggests something guided behind the chaos. Whatever the triangle is, it does not act like a random patch of wilderness. It behaves like a system waiting to be triggered. At the heart of the Alaska Triangle lies its most unsettling truth. Not what disappears, but what never comes back. In most missing person cases around the world, there are fragments left behind. A trail, a signal, a mistake. Something that allows investigators to reconstruct what went wrong. Inside the triangle, what repeats is not evidence but precision. Absence so clean, so deliberate it feels less like the work of nature and more like a process carried out with quiet intent. Researchers who devote years to the triangle do not describe the disappearances as random. They describe them as selective. The missing are often people who, on paper, should be the hardest to lose. Skilled hikers, expert climbers, veteran pilots, people trained to read weather and terrain, people who knew the land well enough to avoid simple errors, people who, under ordinary circumstances, would have left a trace. Locals often talk about the region as a crossing point, a place where two realities brush against one, another in moments too brief for instruments to catch. They believe these crossings explain the vertical beams of light, the metallic resonances on audio, the gaps in memory, and the tall silhouettes reported between the trees. To them, these stories are not symbols or metaphors. They are warnings. Survivor accounts reinforce the pattern. Many describe the environment tilting, as though the ground and sky briefly shifted out of alignment. Others remember hearing footsteps pacing beside them, perfectly synchronized with their own, only to find no one when they turned. Some recall tall figures standing on distant ridges, watching in complete stillness. Almost all of them return with missing time, hours that feel scraped out of their memory like corrupted data. Official science keeps its distance. Authorities repeat the phrase, unknown circumstances, and close the file. Government agencies, when pressed directly about anomaly reports, resort to silence, redirection, or the claim that nothing unusual has been documented. On paper, uncertainty becomes an answer, but the numbers do not look away. The patterns do not soften. The disappearances continue. Even now, as you listen to this story, someone may be moving across the frozen wilderness of the Alaska Triangle, unaware that each step carries them closer to an area where sound dies. Light bends, and the familiar rules of the world begin to thin. They may never feel the moment when they cross whatever boundary exists there. One step might be on solid ground, the next on something that does not quite belong to this side. Because inside the Alaska Triangle, nothing is guaranteed. Familiar rules can fail without warning. And once something or someone enters that place, it may not be a question of rescue anymore. It may simply depend on whether the triangle decides to let them come back.